Now, the question of land ownership in South Africa has been a mainstay of the liberation struggle from the very beginning of colonialism, to the end of apartheid. It remains a talking point decades later. After the advent of democratic South Africa, terms often bandied about include security of tenure, trusteeships and tribal lands under the custody of traditional leaders, amongst others. Now, joining us now to discuss the importance of land to a person's sense of heritage is legal expert Bulelwa Mabasa, director and head of the land reform, restitution and tenure practice at Werkmans Attorneys. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time. I suppose yesterday, with the South Africa marking Heritage Day, everybody came out in their outfits and we spoke about food, we spoke about language, we spoke about culture. And as we listened to EFF leader Julius Malema speaking, he says that heritage is the land, and without it, there is no heritage. And I know this has a special place in your heart.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Paul. Land definitely has a special place, not only in my heart. I think it should inhabit the curiosity, the experience, and the love from all South Africans, from all walks of life. Land is the thing that feeds us. Land is the thing that reminds us who we are, because we do our traditional rites to passage culturally and so forth, spiritually. Land is the thing that connects us with the living and the dead. Land is also the thing that reminds us of who we are, and that's where we derive our identity. So I couldn't agree with you more on the statement that land is also what will connect us to the future generations. That is where we can tell our children and their future about how land contestation and land disposition and conquest has been our history. But hopefully, as I say in my latest memoir called My Land Obsession, hopefully it's also the thing that stands to unite our country.
In your book, you also speak about the spiritual and cultural connection of land and, fighting for land reform in South Africa and the connection. Talk to us about that.
So, worldwide, actually, it's been accepted in anthropology, in history, in paleontology, that land and certain land assets are seen as our spiritual connections to the people or generations that have come before us, and they stand as fortresses to where we can become. I can give you, some examples like Mount Sinai, for example. Mount Sinai is seen to be a mountain that is revered in other cultures, things like caves, mountains, and rivers. And of late, we saw with the judgments in the case of wild sustaining in the so-called it's known as a shell case, where we saw how communities and traditional healers and traditional leaders went about to explain how the ocean in that area serves as a spiritual connection with their ancestors. And so in my book, I also talk about these issues. I specifically talk about a case study in Marimatle, which is in the east of Tabazimbi, where there is a mountain that is connected with caves, where the Tswana people fought battles in the 18th century, trying to fight off, those Difakane or Mfekane wars, and the blood that was spilled on those warriors that were fighting those wars sits today as a mountain that is revered and where people go for their spiritual connection, where people go for their identity. Even people who have certain ailments and diseases go there for a sense of grounding and a sense of belonging. So in my book, I set out quite specifically the other uses of land beyond its finite or economic value, that land becomes important for us in how we see ourselves, in the way that we heal, and in the way that we see ourselves in relation to other people in other parts of the world. So the spiritual importance and significance of land is also recognized in our law. It's recognized in pieces of legislation such as the National Heritage Act, where it is also understood that land can have cultural and spiritual significance. So, that's another aspect that I deal with in my book.
Yeah. And as you speak about the legal aspects of land, where we're sitting as a country is around amending Section 25 of the Constitution. I mean, it's become more of a controversial issue and less of the connection that you speak of, the importance and the heritage that it embodies for South Africans and access to it.
Absolutely, and this is what I try and distill in my memoir, My Land Obsession. What I try to distill there is I try to bring the land question closer to home. I personalize it and I humanize it in the sense that I think it's important for every South African to embody the question. And I think when you read the book, you will find that you are able to trace your unique connection with the land. In my case, for example, it was the fact that, I was born in Meadowlands in 1979, and I was the product of grandparents who were dispossessed of land through the land dispositions that happened through the Group Areas Act, where they were dispossessed of land from Sophia Town. And I also speak about my maternal grandparents in Marapiane, who were forced to live in a rural area, and where my grandfather was forced to be a migrant worker who was then not able to exercise his rights as a father and as a husband because of the system. And so what I try and explain is that the land question is less about academia and amending the constitution and the parliamentary processes. I try and give a message to say that each and every South African citizen has a role to play. And that role to play, in order for us to understand what it is, we need to start unpacking the land question, not as just a political question that political parties talk about when elections come, but it is about whether or not you have access to transport, for example, to get you to work, and how much it costs you to get to work. It's about having access to economic activities, access to schools, access to libraries, and most importantly, it has most to do with how you feel about yourself and whether you have belonging and you have a voice and a space to assert yourself as a South African. So yes, it is indeed not just a legal question that is set aside for academics or for politicians, but rather that it calls for active citizenry and for each and every one of us to play a part.
I suppose there's also an important question around who are the real, in inverted commas, the real beneficiaries of land. I mean, if you look at the land reform projects, I mean, there's one in Mpumalanga, as you and I speak, 800 million rand project that's said to only benefit a few, and the bulk of the money over this project going to a few. And also looking at Advocate Ngai Tobi, who also says that he doesn't believe that the trusteeship system of land ownership benefits the landless majority, saying it seems to only benefit a selected few.
Absolutely. And we can trace the reason for that, on the fact that the Constitution in Section 25 tells the state that the state must introduce legislation that introduces an act of parliament where it is clearly set out in a transparent and accessible way who is given land, for what purposes, and how that process must work. But since the introduction of the Constitution in 1996 and its implementation from 1997, the state is yet to pass legislation that tells each South African citizen how they can access land, where they must access that land, who they must be, and for what purpose that land must be used for. So Parliament has not done its job in terms of making sure that that happens. And indeed, the system that we've inherited an apartheid law system that says that if you are black and you live in a communal area, in the rural areas, for example, you cannot own land in your own name or in your family name because that land is held in trust by the state. And what we see happen there is that people, thousands and thousands of people are forced to make land decisions about how they want that land to work in circumstances where if you are in the formal economy you live in the urban area, you have a mortgage bond, you have a lease, you have that autonomy to decide how you want to deal with that land and how you interact with that land. And so the state is yet to create a system that allows normal citizens, despite, regardless of whether or not you are black or white, living in a communal area or urban area, to exercise those rights to autonomy. So if we had an act of parliament like the Constitution envisages, we would all be able to know who is entitled to apply for what land, where is that land, and who are the people that benefit from that land. The work that we did as part of the Presidential Advisory Panel, we had recommended that we need a beneficiary and selection and allocation policy, or an act of parliament that says government is going to concentrate on these types of people so that they can be given pieces of land. We recommended that state-owned land must be released in order to make sure that government deals with urban land need, and that unused land or unused government buildings can then be released in order to make provision for the urban poor. Because as you know, the statistic is that more than 65% of South Africans actually want to be in urban areas in order to become economically active. And as we speak today, after all these years, Parliament has not introduced that piece of legislation that would make all of us aware in a transparent way, in a way where there is public participation that says who is going to be given the land and where.
Urban land is crucial, but we also should not be ignoring the rural land when it comes to the economy and adding to it, and perhaps working with what we have in the meantime as we work towards the bigger plan and push for access in the long term.
Absolutely. And in fact, what is crucial to understand is that what has happened, especially on rural and communal lands, those are the pieces of land where lots of minerals are found. Minerals such as gold and platinum and so forth, they happen to be found in those rural and communal areas. And because we don't have a land tenure system that is clear, that is coherent, most companies and mining companies are unable to actually even know how to do community consultation so that the people that are living on those pieces of land are not exploited, that they are able to also derive value from the minerals that are found. But it's not just a mining issue. You will also find that because of the South Africa's geography, you find that land that is sitting on communal land or rural areas, or what was the so-called branchlands, that's the land where opportunities have come about for wind energy and solar energy.
We're going to have to abruptly leave it there. And thank you for your time. Legal expert Bulelwa Mabasa, Director and Head of the Land Reform, Restitution and Tenure Practice at Werkmans Attorneys. Thank you so much for your time. We leave it there for now.